Some of the hardest people to help are the people who can explain exactly why they are stuck. They can explain their childhood. They can explain the market. They can explain the relationship, the personality type, the power dynamics, the timing, the incentives, and the worst case scenario. They can explain it so well that everyone around them assumes they must be close to changing. But then 6 months pass. A year passes, and somehow the same decision is still sitting there. The same conversation has not happened. The same project has not started. The same relationship still hurts. The same fear has simply learned a few new words. If that feels familiar, this is not a video about being less intelligent. It is about noticing the moment intelligence becomes a hiding place. Because a sharp mind can solve problems, but it can also build extremely convincing reasons to avoid the one thing that would actually move your life forward. Today, we are going through 60 emotional loops that can keep smart people stuck. Not because smart people are broken, but because they are often very good at turning fear into analysis, pain into productivity, and uncertainty into another research project. Before we start, one important note. These are not diagnoses, and you do not need to recognize every loop. Think of them as patterns to test, not labels to wear. If a pattern is causing serious distress, affecting your safety, or feels bigger than you can manage alone, talking with a qualified mental health professional can be a strong next step. For everyone else, here is the method for this video. Each time you recognize a loop, do not ask, "What is wrong with me?" Ask one calmer question. What is this loop trying to protect me from? Then listen for the small exit move at the end of each section. You do not have to repair your whole life tonight. You just have to interrupt one automatic pattern before it completes another lap. Let's begin with the loops that are easiest to mistake for intelligence.
Loop 1. Thinking instead of starting. The first loop is thinking instead of starting. You have probably seen this one before. You tell yourself you are preparing, but preparation never turns into motion. You are not lazy. In fact, you may be working very hard inside your own head. You are comparing options, researching risks, imagining outcomes, and trying to make the first step perfectly intelligent. Imagine someone who wants to start a small business. They spend 3 months studying branding, legal structures, pricing psychology, and competitor websites. All useful things, but they still have not spoken to one potential customer. The reason is simple. Thinking feels productive, while action creates evidence. And evidence can prove that your beautiful plan was incomplete. The exit is to choose an action that gives you information, not perfection. Send one message. Publish one rough page. Make one call. The rule is simple. When you catch yourself thinking for the 3rd time about the same decision, do one thing that changes the data. Loop 2. Research as a safety behavior. Research can be wise, but research becomes a loop when it is no longer helping you choose. It is helping you postpone being judged by reality. Maybe you want to buy a camera, change careers, invest in a course, or move to a new city. You read reviews until every option has a flaw. Then you read opposing reviews until every flaw has an exception. Eventually, the research creates the feeling that no decision is safe enough to make. The hidden fear is not usually making the wrong choice. It is having to live with the fact that every meaningful choice includes trade-offs. No amount of information can remove that. Try setting a research boundary before you begin. Decide how many sources you will consult, what your decision criteria are, and when the decision will be made. Research should have an end date. Otherwise, it quietly becomes a room you live in. Loop 3. Needing the perfect plan. Smart people often overvalue plans because plans make the future feel controllable. The problem is that real life does not reward the most elegant plan. It rewards the plan that survives contact with reality.
Suppose you want to transition into a different career. You may feel pressure to map the exact path, what to learn, who to meet, how much money to save, what job title comes next, and what success will look like in 5 years. But the people who actually change careers usually discover the route while moving. Their first project changes the plan. Their first conversation changes the plan. Their first mistake changes the plan. Use the 70% rule. When you have about 70% of the clarity you think you need, take the smallest reversible step. A plan should be a compass, not a contract. Loop 4. Explaining the feeling instead of feeling it. Some people can analyze an emotion before the emotion has even finished arriving. They do not say, "I feel hurt." They say, "This is probably connected to my attachment pattern, my expectation bias, and the social context of what happened." That insight may be true, but sometimes it is a way to avoid the rawer sentence underneath. "That hurt me, and I do not know what to do with it." Understanding a feeling is not the same as allowing yourself to experience it. If you notice yourself building a lecture around a painful emotion, pause and name the feeling in plain language. I am disappointed. I am lonely. I am embarrassed. Give it 90 seconds without trying to fix it. Emotional clarity often arrives after emotional permission, not before it. Loop 5. Waiting for certainty. The certainty loop sounds responsible. It says, "I will act when I know enough." The problem is that certainty is not the price of action. It is usually the reward for action. Think about asking someone out, submitting an application, setting a boundary, or sharing work publicly. You may believe that one more week of reflection will make the outcome predictable. It will not. You are trying to get a guarantee from a situation that only offers probabilities. The exit is to ask a better question. Instead of, "How can I make sure this works?" ask, "What would I do if it did not work?" If you can handle the downside, you are often ready to move. Loop 6. Complexity as a shield. A complicated explanation can make you feel safe because nobody can easily challenge it. If your problem has 12 causes, 6 exceptions, and 3 competing frameworks, you never have to face the painfully simple choice at the center. For example, someone may say they can't leave a dream job because of the economy, their resume, their family expectations, their identity, their industry, their health insurance, and the uncertainty of their next move. All of those factors may matter. But sometimes beneath the complexity, there is one direct truth. I am afraid to be a beginner again. Try reducing the situation to one sentence that begins with, "The decision I am avoiding is." If that sentence makes you uncomfortable, you have probably found the real doorway.
Loop 7. Protecting the identity of potential. Potential is comfortable. Potential lets you believe you could be exceptional without forcing you to be ordinary in public first. You may tell yourself you could write the book, launch the channel, learn the skill, or get in shape if you really committed. That statement protects your self-image because it keeps your ability theoretical. The moment you publish, perform, or compete, your potential becomes visible, and it may be average at first. The exit is to trade impressive potential for visible practice. Let yourself be a beginner where people can see it. A small, completed attempt is worth more than a large, protected possibility. Loop 8. Performing the post-mortem before the event. This loop happens when you review your failure before you have even acted. You imagine the awkward silence, the harsh comment, the bad result, the wasted money, and the person who will say they knew it would not work. Your mind calls this preparation, but often it is emotional rehearsal for an event that has not occurred. The rehearsal drains the energy you would need to test the actual situation. When you catch yourself performing a future postmortem, write down the prediction, then label it clearly. This is a forecast, not a fact. After you act, compare the forecast to reality. Over time, you will see how often fear was presenting possibility as certainty. Loop 9. Collecting frameworks instead of changing behavior.
Frameworks feel like progress because they organize confusion. You learn about habits, attachment, productivity, negotiation, finance, and mindset. Soon you can explain almost anything, but your daily behavior stays strangely familiar. The loop is not learning. Learning is valuable. The loop is using knowledge as a substitute for repetition. You may know 10 ways to communicate more clearly, but still avoid one honest conversation. Give every new framework a behavioral requirement. If you learn an idea, choose one action you must take within 48 hours. Knowledge that never reaches your calendar is often just entertainment wearing a serious outfit. Loop 10. Calling self-criticism high standards. Some people believe they are hard on themselves because they care about excellence. But there is a difference between standards and self-contempt. A standard says, this needs another revision. Self-contempt says, if this is not exceptional, I am a disappointment. One improves the work. The other makes starting emotionally expensive. Before you begin a task, define what done enough looks like. Not perfect, not genius, done enough. When you finish, evaluate the work against the standard you set, not against the voice in your head that keeps moving the finish line.
Loop 11. Intellectualizing vulnerability. You may be able to discuss emotions beautifully as long as they are abstract. You can talk about trust, intimacy, grief, and connection. But when it is time to say, I miss you, I need more from this, or that hurt me, your language becomes vague and careful. This loop protects you from the risk of being seen clearly. If you speak in theory, nobody can reject the most tender part of what you mean. Try replacing one abstract sentence with one concrete truth. Instead of, the dynamic feels inconsistent, say, when you disappear for days, I feel unimportant. The goal is not drama, it is accuracy. Loop 12. Being useful instead of being known. Being useful can feel safer than being loved. You solve problems, remember details, give advice, organize plans, and become the person everyone calls in a crisis. People appreciate you. But appreciation is not always the same as intimacy. The loop begins when usefulness becomes the only way you know how to earn closeness. You may feel uncomfortable receiving help, asking for care, or being valued when you are not performing. Practice letting someone support you in a small way without immediately paying them back. Real connection requires being useful sometimes and being human sometimes. Loop 13. Mind reading. Smart people can be especially skilled at guessing what others think. The trouble is that being skilled at guessing is not the same as being accurate. A friend sends a short reply, and you construct a full explanation. They are annoyed. You were too much. They are pulling away. You review every recent interaction for proof. Meanwhile, they may simply be busy, tired, distracted, or struggling with something unrelated to you. When you notice a mind-reading story, separate observation from interpretation. The observation is, their reply was short. The interpretation is, they are upset with me. If the relationship matters, ask a direct, low-pressure question instead of treating a guess like evidence. Loop 14. Collecting evidence that you are rejected. This loop turns the world into a courtroom where every delayed reply, changed tone, and canceled plan becomes evidence for one familiar verdict. I am not wanted. The mind does this because uncertainty hurts. A painful conclusion can feel more stable than not knowing. But when you only collect evidence for rejection, you begin behaving as though the case is already closed. You pull away, become guarded, or test people until the relationship starts to feel tense for real. The exit is to collect disconforming evidence too. Ask yourself, what facts would I notice if I were not trying to prove I am unwanted?
You do not need forced optimism. You need a fair trial. Loop 15. Turning conflict into a core. In conflict, some people stop trying to understand and start trying to win. They collect timestamps, exact wording, past examples, and contradictions. The goal becomes proving that their pain was justified beyond reasonable doubt. The trouble is that most close relationships do not improve because one person wins the argument. They improve because both people understand what needs to change next. When conflict starts, make one sentence your anchor. I want to solve this, not win it. Then ask for a specific future behavior. Next time, please tell me you need space instead of disappearing. That is more useful than proving your case for the 10th time. Loop 16. Treating trust as all or nothing. All or nothing trust says, if you disappoint me once, I should never trust you again. Or on the other extreme, if I love you, I should overlook every warning sign. Both positions avoid the more difficult skill of calibrated trust. Healthy trust is not blind faith or permanent suspicion. It is the ability to update based on patterns. One missed promise is not a full character report. 10 repeated broken promises are not something to explain away forever. Try asking, what level of access has this person earned through consistent behavior? You can care about someone and still choose boundaries that match the evidence. Loop 17. Performing extreme self-reliance. Extreme self-reliance often sounds admirable. I do not need anyone. I can handle it. I hate burdening people. But sometimes underneath that strength is a rule. If you never need anything, nobody can disappoint you by refusing. The cost is that people may experience you as distant, difficult to help, or impossible to know. You can become lonely while looking completely capable. Start small. Ask for a specific, reasonable form of support before you are in crisis. Let someone bring the coffee, review the draft, or listen without turning the moment into a debt you must repay.
Loop 18. Correcting people to protect your worth. When you are used to being valued for intelligence, being wrong can feel larger than it is. A casual correction, a disagreement, or a detail you missed may trigger the urge to defend, explain, or correct the other person right back. That impulse is not always about truth. Sometimes it is about protecting the identity of being the one who sees clearly. Before you correct someone, ask, will this make the situation more accurate, more useful, or more connected? If the answer is no, let the small error pass. You do not need to win every factual moment to remain intelligent. Loop 19. Rescuing people to feel necessary. The rescue loop begins with empathy, but can quietly become a way to feel indispensable. You choose people with problems, take responsibility for their choices, and feel deeply involved in fixing what they have not asked you to fix. At first, you feel needed. Later, you feel drained, resentful, and confused about why they did not change after all your effort. The exit is to ask permission before giving help, and to separate support from ownership. You can care deeply without carrying another adult's entire life on your back. Loop 20. Waiting to be chosen. This loop says, if they really cared, they would notice. You wait for the invitation, the apology, the promotion, the message, the compliment, or the opportunity that proves your value without forcing you to risk asking. The problem is that waiting feels emotionally pure because you avoid the vulnerability of making your desire visible, but it also gives other people control over whether your life moves. Choose one thing you have been waiting to be offered and ask for it directly. You may not always get a yes, but a clear no is often more liberating than a silent maybe.
Loop 21. Treating productivity as proof of worth. When productivity becomes proof of worth, rest feels guilty, and unfinished tasks feel personal. You may have a normal human day. Low energy, competing responsibilities, a bad night of sleep, and still judge yourself as though you failed a moral test. This loop is powerful because it rewards you with a temporary sense of control. If you can just do more, you can feel safe again. But eventually, every task becomes a referendum on whether you deserve to relax. Try separating your output from your value. At the end of the day, ask 2 questions. What did I complete? And how did I treat myself while I was doing it? Both answers matter. Loop 22. Believing rest must be earned. If you only rest after you have earned it, you will rarely rest. There will always be one more email, one more improvement, one more thing you could have done better. Imagine a phone that says it will recharge only after it proves it has been useful enough. It sounds absurd, but many people apply that exact rule to themselves. Schedule rest before you hit the wall. Treat it as maintenance, not a reward. Your future decisions depend on the energy of the person making them. Loop 23. Needing a crisis to feel motivated. Some people work best only when the deadline becomes terrifying. The pressure sharpens focus, silences distractions, and gives the day a clear purpose. Over time, the nervous system can confuse panic with productivity. The cost is that calm feels empty. You delay until urgency creates the energy you do not know how to generate gently. Try creating smaller, artificial constraints before the crisis arrives. Use a public deadline, a short work sprint, a scheduled review, or a commitment to send a rough draft. Build structure early so emergency does not have to do all the work. Loop 24. Planning for the dopamine hit. Planning can feel amazing because it gives you the pleasure of a new life without the friction of living it. You build the workout plan, the content calendar, the budget, the study system, and the perfect morning routine. For a few hours, it feels like you have already changed. Then the next morning arrives, and the plan asks for ordinary repetition. That is when the excitement disappears. Make your plan smaller than your enthusiasm. If the system requires a perfect mood, a perfect schedule, and a new identity, it is not a system. It is a fantasy with a calendar attached. Loop 25. Optimizing before you have evidence. This loop shows up when you spend more time improving the method than doing the thing. You optimize your note-taking app before studying. You redesign your workspace before writing. You choose the perfect software before recording one video. Optimization is useful after you have enough experience to know what the bottleneck actually is. Before that, it can be elegant procrastination. The exit is to earn optimization. Do the rough version 5 times first. Then improve the part that repeatedly creates friction. Let real experience tell you what needs fixing. Loop 26. Only rewarding outcomes. If you only reward outcomes, you create a life where progress feels invisible until the finish line. You may work for weeks, learn, practice, recover from mistakes, and still feel like nothing counts because the final result is not here yet. This makes difficult goals emotionally expensive. You train your brain to associate effort with deprivation. Reward the process in a concrete way. After completing the behavior you promised yourself, mark it, track it, or allow a small pleasure. You are not bribing yourself. You are teaching your brain that consistency has a payoff before the grand result arrives. Loop 27. Using comparison as your main fuel.
Comparison can create a burst of energy. You see someone younger, richer, fitter, more visible, or further ahead, and suddenly you want to work. But fuel that comes from humiliation burns dirty. Soon, every success feels too small because someone else did it faster. You may become productive, but never satisfied. Use comparison as information, not identity. Ask, what specific behavior can I learn from this person? Then return to your own scope. Your life needs a direction, not a permanent wipe. Loop 28. Moving the finish line. You achieve something you wanted, and for a few minutes, you feel relieved. Then your mind says, yes, but now I should be doing the next thing. The finish line moves because stillness would force you to feel whatever achievement was supposed to solve. More success will not fix a lack of permission to feel enough. When you reach a milestone, pause long enough to register it. Tell one person. Write down what changed because of the effort. Celebrate in a way that marks completion. If you never let yourself arrive, no destination will feel like home.
Loop 29. Neglecting recovery because you are behind. When people feel behind, recovery is often the first thing they sacrifice. They sleep less, skip meals, stop moving, ignore friends, and treat basic care as an obstacle to catching up. But a depleted brain makes shorter-term, more emotional decisions. The strategy used to escape the backlog can make the backlog harder to manage. Treat sleep, food, movement, and connection as part of the work system. You are not stepping away from progress when you recover. You are protecting the person who has to keep doing the work tomorrow. Loop 30. Learning forever, practicing never. There is a quiet comfort in being a student forever. You can keep learning languages without speaking, business without selling, fitness without training hard enough to be seen, or communication without having the uncomfortable conversation. The problem is not curiosity. The problem is refusing the phase where your learning becomes visible, imperfect practice. Set a ratio. For every hour you consume information, spend at least 1 hour applying it. If the topic matters, practice must eventually become public in some form.
Loop 31. Forecasting collapse. This loop takes one uncertain event and expands it into a full disaster movie. You consider applying for a job, and suddenly you are imagining rejection, embarrassment, financial ruin, disappointment from your family, and a future where you never recover. Your mind believes it is protecting you by seeing the dangers first, but it is often stacking possibilities until they feel like probabilities. Shrink the timeline. Ask, what is the next real consequence of this action? Not the 10th imagined consequence, the next one. Usually it is manageable. An email, a conversation, a no, or a revision. Loop 32. Rehearsing conversations until they cannot happen naturally. You want to ask for a raise, address a conflict, or tell someone how you feel. So you rehearse the conversation in your head. Then you rehearse their response. Then you rehearse your response to their response. By the time the conversation arrives, you are so attached to the script that any unexpected sentence feels threatening. You stop listening because you are trying to protect the scene you prepared. Prepare your intention, not every line. Know what you want to communicate, what boundary you need, and what outcome you can accept. Then leave room for a real human conversation. Loop 33. Calling avoidance preparation. Preparation has a clear purpose and a clear endpoint. Avoidance wears the costume of preparation, but never reaches the moment of contact. Maybe you keep practicing privately before you share your work. Maybe you keep organizing your thoughts before you ask for help. Maybe you keep waiting to be calmer before you face the thing making you anxious. Ask yourself one direct question. What would I be doing today if I were preparing to act
rather than preparing to prepare. Then do the smallest version of that. Loop 34. Choosing a non-decision. Not deciding is still a decision. Staying in the vague job, the vague relationship, the vague plan, or the vague living situation is often easier because you can tell yourself nothing final has happened. But time is not neutral. When you do not choose, the default keeps choosing for you. Set a decision date. You do not need to force an immediate answer, but you do need to stop treating indefinite delay as open-mindedness. Open-mindedness gathers information. Avoidance refuses a deadline. Loop 35. Turning every choice into an emergency. Some people cannot decide unless the stakes feel enormous. They treat a restaurant choice, a message, a purchase, or a weekend plan as though it reveals their entire identity. This happens because the brain is trying to avoid regret. If every choice has to be perfect, then no choice can be made casually. Classify decisions before you make them. Is this reversible or irreversible? Is it important or merely visible? A reversible, low-stakes decision deserves a fast answer. Save your full analytical power for choices that actually shape your life. Loop 36. Checking and rechecking. You make a decision, then reopen it. You send the message, then reread it. You lock the door, then check again. You choose a path, then return to the comparison table. Sometimes checking is practical. The loop starts when checking no longer increases safety, but only briefly lowers anxiety. The relief teaches your brain to ask for another check. Try a one-check rule for low-stakes decisions. Check once with full attention. Then say out loud, I have completed the check. The goal is not to feel instantly certain. It is to stop feeding the loop with repeated reassurance. Loop 37. Keeping every option open. Open options can feel like freedom, but after a while, keeping every door open becomes a way to avoid walking through any of them. You do not commit to the project because another opportunity may appear. You do not choose a city because something better may exist. You do not deepen a relationship because a more perfect match may be possible. Every meaningful choice closes some doors. That is not a flaw. It is what gives a chosen path enough energy to become real. Choose one direction for a defined season. You can reevaluate later, but you cannot build a life out of endless tabs. Loop 38. Preparing an exit before you enter. You start something new while already imagining how you will leave if it becomes uncomfortable. You join the class, but do not introduce yourself. You take the job, but keep emotionally detached. You date, but never let the other person know what you want. This protects you from disappointment. It also prevents the experience from having a fair chance to become meaningful. Try making one specific commitment to engagement. If you join the group, attend 4 times. If you start the project, finish the first version. Do not require lifelong commitment. Require enough presence to gather honest evidence.
Loop 39. Treating discomfort as danger. Not every uncomfortable feeling is a warning. Sometimes discomfort is the sensation of doing something unfamiliar, visible, honest, or important. If you treat every increase in anxiety as a stop sign, your comfort zone becomes your entire decision-making system. You may feel safe, but your world slowly gets smaller. Learn to ask, is this unsafe, or is this just uncomfortable? If it is uncomfortable but aligned with your values, take one small step while the feeling is still there. Courage is not waiting for discomfort to disappear. Loop 40. Reading feedback as a verdict. Feedback can feel like a threat when your identity is tied to being competent. A comment on your work becomes a comment on your worth. A suggestion becomes proof that you should not have tried. The result is predictable. You either defend every choice or avoid showing work at all. When you receive feedback, separate the information from the emotional sting. Ask, is there one specific part here that could improve the next version? You do not have to accept every opinion, but you can use useful signal without turning it into a verdict on who you are. Loop 41. Making intelligence your main identity. Being intelligent is valuable, but when it becomes your main identity, you may avoid anything that makes you look inexperienced, slow, emotional, or confused. You start protecting the image of being smart more than you pursue the experience of becoming wiser. You do not ask basic questions. You do not take beginner risks. You do not admit when someone else knows more. Try giving yourself a second identity. Learner. A learner is allowed to look clumsy. A learner asks. A learner experiments. Intelligence becomes more useful when it is no longer something you have to defend every minute. Loop 42. Being right instead of being close. Sometimes the need to be right is really a need to feel safe. If you can prove your point, maybe nobody can dismiss you. But in close relationships, constant correction can make people feel managed instead of understood. You may win the factual point and lose the emotional moment. Before you respond, ask yourself what the other person needs most right now. Precision, support, accountability, or simply to be heard. You can be accurate without making every conversation a test. Loop 43. Moral perfectionism. Moral perfectionism says, if I make a mistake, I am a bad person. It turns normal human failure into a permanent character verdict. Because the stakes feel so high, you may hide errors, over-apologize, avoid difficult discussions, or become harsh toward other people's mistakes too. You are trying to stay clean in a world where growth is messy. Replace the question, am I a good person? With, what is the responsible next action? Repair where you can. Learn what you can. Then, allow yourself to remain a person in progress. Loop 44. Using self-awareness as a weapon against yourself. Self-awareness is supposed to create choice, but some people use it to become more sophisticated critics of themselves. They say, I know I am doing that because I am avoidant. Or, I know this is my insecurity. And then use the label as proof that change is impossible. Insight turns into a sentence instead of a starting point. When you identify a pattern, add one more sentence. And the next small thing I can do differently is, awareness only becomes useful when it changes your next move. Loop 45. Using cynicism as armor. Cynicism can make you feel smart because it protects you from looking naive. You assume people are selfish, opportunities are scams, relationships fail, and optimism is for people who do not understand the world. Sometimes cynicism is just disappointment that has decided never to risk hope again. You do not need blind optimism. Try disciplined hope instead. Ask, what is one small bet worth making, even if the outcome is uncertain? A guarded life may prevent embarrassment, but it can also prevent participation. Loop 46. Using optimism to avoid boundaries. The opposite loop is over-optimism. You keep seeing someone's potential, the future possibility, the good intention, the one nice moment that might erase the repeated patterning. Hope is healthy when it is paired with evidence. It becomes self-abandonment when it asks you to ignore what is happening now. Use this question. If nothing changed for the next year, would I still choose this? If the answer is no, stop making decisions based only on the version of the situation you hope will arrive. Loop 47. Feeding outrage to feel clear. Outrage can provide a fast sense of clarity. There is a villain, a side, a problem, and a reason to feel morally awake. In a confusing world, that can feel stabilizing. But if you are constantly consuming outrage, your nervous system may stay activated long after the information stops being useful. You become more certain and less discerning. Before you share, argue, or keep scrolling, ask, what action does this information actually require from me? If the answer is none, consider stepping away. Awareness without agency can become emotional noise.
Loop 48. Treating attention as proof of value. When attention becomes proof of value, silence feels like rejection. You may check views, likes, replies, read receipts, or invitations, because each one temporarily answers the question, do I matter? The problem is that attention is unstable. It rises and falls for reasons that have nothing to do with your worth. Build at least one area of your life where the score is private. A skill, a friendship, a routine, or a creative practice that matters even when nobody is watching can return some of your self-respect to your own hands.
Loop 49. Comparing your private process to someone else's public result. You see someone's polished announcement, finished body, successful company, confident relationship, or clean highlight reel. Then you compare it to your unfinished, complicated, ordinary life. That comparison is structurally unfair. You are comparing your behind-the-scenes footage to somebody else's trailer. When comparison shows up, ask for a process detail, not a result. What did they practice? What did they fail at? What support did they have? Turning envy into curiosity can give you information without making you smaller. Loop 50. Letting the past explain the future forever. Your history matters. It can explain why certain situations trigger you, why you hesitate, and why some choices feel loaded. But explanation becomes a loop when it turns into a permanent forecast. You may say, I am this way because of what happened, and that can be true. But the next question is still available. What can I practice now that my past did not teach me? Do not erase your history. Just do not let it write every future line by itself.
Loop 51. Mistaking understanding for practice. You can understand a pattern perfectly and still keep repeating it. You may know exactly why you avoid, why you overwork, why you choose the same people, or why you become anxious. But understanding alone does not create a new reflex. Change happens when insight is followed by enough small repetitions that your body begins to trust a new response. Choose one behavior that represents the insight. If your pattern is avoiding difficult conversations, send the message. If your pattern is overworking, end work at the time you said you would. Let practice prove what insight only described. Loop 52. Calling every fear intuition. Intuition can be useful, but fear can borrow intuition's voice. It can say, something feels off, when what really feels off is uncertainty, visibility, or the loss of control. The difference is often in the pattern. Intuition tends to be specific and calm. Fear tends to be urgent, repetitive, and hungry for reassurance. When you feel a strong internal warning, write down the concrete evidence. If you have evidence, respect it. If you only have a looping feeling, take a small reversible step and gather more information before you let fear make the whole decision. Loop 53. Turning urgency into a personality. Some people live as though every task is late, every message is urgent, and every decision must happen now. Urgency creates adrenaline, and adrenaline can make you feel powerful. But a life run entirely by urgency makes reflection feel like weakness. You may solve many immediate problems while repeatedly ignoring the important problems that do not scream. Create a daily pause before you react. Ask, is this urgent, important, both, or neither? Then schedule the important things before the urgent things fill every available space. Loop 54. Waiting to feel confident. Confidence is often treated like a prerequisite. Once I feel more confident, I will apply, speak, launch, ask, or leave. But confidence usually comes after repeated evidence that you can survive the thing you were avoiding.
Waiting for confidence before action is like waiting to be fit before you start exercising. Replace the confidence goal with a repetition goal. Decide how many attempts you will make, not how fearless you will feel. Confidence grows from survived exposure, not perfect readiness. Loop 55. Keeping an emotional debt ledger. The emotional debt ledger tracks every time you gave more, cared more, showed up more, or sacrificed more. Some memory is necessary. Patterns matter. But when the ledger becomes your primary relationship tool, love starts to feel like accounting. You may become quietly resentful because nobody can repay debts they do not know you are recording. Instead of silently tracking, communicate sooner. Ask for reciprocity clearly. Make one request before resentment becomes a whole internal spreadsheet. Loop 56. Bargaining with your future self. Future you is always going to be more disciplined, less tired, more motivated, and somehow better equipped to handle the task you keep postponing. So you give the work to them. The problem is that future you keeps waking up as current you, with the same limits and the same calendar. Make the task small until today you can do it. If you cannot do the full workout, walk for 10 minutes. If you cannot write the chapter, write the first paragraph. Stop making your future self carry the emotional weight you can reduce right now. Loop 57. Starting over instead of continuing. Starting over feels clean. New notebook, new plan, new routine, new identity. Continuing means admitting that the previous attempt was imperfect and that progress may look messy. The restart can become a way to escape the shame of being halfway through. Before you reset, ask, what would continuing look like at 60%? Continue from the real place you are, not the imaginary place where you never made mistakes. Loop 58. Needing to solve everything alone. Smart people often assume that if they cannot solve a problem alone, they have failed some private competence test. So they delay asking for feedback, coaching, support, or perspective until the problem becomes much larger. But outside perspective is not proof of weakness. It is data you cannot generate from inside your own loop. Choose one person and ask one precise question. Not, what should I do with my life? Ask, can you tell me what you notice in this pattern? Good questions make support practical. Loop 59. Building a life around avoiding embarrassment. Embarrassment is one of the most powerful hidden drivers of stuckness. You do not apply because you may be rejected. You do not post because it may be ignored. You do not learn because somebody may see you struggle. The result is a very controlled life that slowly becomes too small for your actual ambitions. Practice small, intentional embarrassment. Ask a question you could have Googled. Post a version that is not perfect. Say, I do not know. Embarrassment shrinks when you stop treating it like an emergency.
Loop 60. Believing intelligence can solve every emotional problem. This is the final loop, and it may be the most important. Intelligence is a powerful tool. It can help you understand systems, notice patterns, build plans, and make better decisions. But it cannot make you immune to grief, fear, attachment, shame, or uncertainty. Some parts of life do not need a better argument. They need a conversation, a boundary, a risk, a period of rest, a repeated practice, or the courage to feel something without turning it into a puzzle. So when you feel stuck, do not ask only, what is the smartest explanation? Also ask, what is the most honest next move? Sometimes the coldest logic is not more analysis. It is admitting that you know enough to take one step. If one of these loops hit a little too close to home, do not try to fix all 60. Pick one. Write down its number. Then write down one small action that interrupts it in the next 24 hours. Maybe it is loop 2, and you stop researching after 3 sources. Maybe it is loop 12, and you let someone help you. Maybe it is loop 34, and you finally set a date for the decision you have been delaying. Maybe it is loop 54,
and you trade the goal of feeling confident for the goal of making one attempt. That is how change usually happens. Not through one dramatic realization, but through one honest interruption repeated enough times that the old loop stops feeling inevitable. If this video gave you language for a pattern you have been running, comment with the number that stood out most. And if you want more videos that help you see the systems behind your behavior, without the shame, the noise, or the fake certainty, subscribe to Cold Logic. Your mind is powerful. Make sure it is helping you move, not just helping you explain why you have not. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.